So, I know I expressed some concerns about her last week, but this episode, the Borg Queen made me feel what every single Borg Queen should make someone feel. Scare-rousal. I was very scared and aroused at the same time. So 10 out of 10 on the Borg Queen. Ooh, that was loud. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Picard Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation. Creepy. Ooh, Borg stuff. We know what's gonna happen. Don't know what this voice is. This is what we're doing. No, it's turning into Watto from Star Wars. It's fine. I don't know what's going on. Anyways, welcome to my review of Star Trek Picard. As per usual, I'll be doing my spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we'll be getting into spoilers in the back. However, before we get into my spoiler-free thoughts, a quick announcement. Starting next week with my review of Star Trek Picard Season 2, Episode 4, I am going to be moving all of my Star Trek reviews to my secondary channel, Jessiegender After Dark. For those of you who don't know what that is, Jessiegender After Dark, as I mentioned, is another channel that I have that is linked down below, which is where I feature all my news, reviews, reactions, live stream clips, as well as interviews that I've done with numerous different people, including, for example, an interview that I did with Star Trek Picard's executive producer, Kirsten Beyer, which I did a few weeks ago, which you should totally check out over on that channel. And the reason I'm moving my Star Trek reviews over to that channel is I want to start to make a more clear delineation of my different styles of content. This channel that you're currently on, Jessiegender, I want to be a place for my bigger video essays that are more heavily produced, use bigger production value, and are generally going to be much longer, whereas that channel is going to be more of my news and reactions and reviews sort of place. And I want to separate them out so that people can find what they're looking for from my content, as well as build out both channels appropriately in the right way. So don't worry, if you love my Star Trek reviews, they are not going away. I'm still going to be doing them. They're just going to be over on that channel. And I appreciate any comments, feedbacks, or thoughts that you have on that going forward, because I want to learn how to grow my content and do better with them and grow myself as a creator. And I think that this is the best way in order to do that and learn how to better showcase my content to people that are maybe looking for it. So please go subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my reviews there starting next week. And don't worry, I'll be reviewing Star Trek Strange New Worlds over there as well, because I will not be missing my Captain Pike's daddy beard for a hot second. Love my Silver Fox beards. Believe me, it's going to be a problem. You don't want to miss me freaking out over Ansem Mount when that season starts. Trust me. Sorry, I've been thinking about his beard and Obi-Wan Kenobi's beard for like a week now. It's kind of a problem. Anyways, that stuff out of the way, let's get into my spoiler-free thoughts on Assimilation. This episode is yet another standout episode of Star Trek Picard. I did not expect this show to turn around in quality as much as it did. While I liked elements of Star Trek Picard Season 1, I had issues with it, but these past 3 episodes have just consistently shown me that this show is just on a huge trajectory to just be a freaking fantastic show. This episode, I think, is a little bit lesser than the past 2, mostly because it feels like it's doing a lot more work as a bridge episode to get us from the beginning of the season, and so it's sort of like setting up the stakes and sort of fast-paced action into more of what the rest of the season is going to be. And I'm kind of fine with that. Most serialized shows do have these sort of like set up and bridge episodes, but that nonetheless does not mean that this episode is a slacker by any means. There are some freaking-tastic scenes, and I think the most standout of all of them is with the Borg Queen, Jurati, and Picard. Last episode, like I said, I had my complaints about the Borg Queen be kind of flat and static. This episode completely changes that around because, oh boy, is she terrifying in some of the best ways in these scenes, and it just has me so excited to see where they're going with her. On top of that, there's some surprising moments in this, given something that happens to a particular character towards the top of the episode. I'm like, dang, they are actually showing stakes within this, because most Star Trek shows of the modern era have eschewed a lot of stakes, kind of going for the quicker and easier version, but this episode very much proves, like, no, there are definitely stakes going into this, and I really deeply appreciated that. That being said, the rest of this episode is kind of like a slowdown moment, which allows our characters a few beats to interact with each other and really get to have a more lower stakes moment, so these characters just sort of like sit with their own interpersonal problems and make us feel like where all these characters are at after such like big, fast-paced moments that have been going on throughout the previous episodes. I think my only issue with this episode is really not to do with this episode itself, but more just me wondering what they're going to do with some of these storylines that they're setting up within this episode down the line, because they could do a fantastic job with them or they could not, but it's hard for me to sit here in the middle of a season to kind of judge where episodes are going. So I'm sort of like, I see they're setting this up and it's fine here, but I'm curious to see how they're going to eventually pay it off. But all that being said, within this episode itself, I am very much on board. This show has completely turned around in quality, and while I think this is the the worst quote-unquote episode of the season so far. That is by no means a knock against this episode, but just a high bar of quality that the past two episodes have set. And this one is just more getting us from here to there going forward. And yes, I hope that was a Star Trek Enterprise reference. That all being said, that is my spoiler-free thoughts on the episode, so let's get into spoilers, because I have some things to say, everybody. So this episode picks up right where last episode left off, with the crew being held at gunpoint by 709's, fascist husband, as you do every once in a while. Who hasn't had a fascist husband in the past? But anyways, this little jerk shoots Elnor, and leaving him to die, but the crew manages to get one up on them and disintegrates them, which I thought was an interesting comparison, considering that they didn't disintegrate Elnor, who they are racist against, but our crew is just murdering them. And I understand the reasoning, because if we had the crew disable them and stun them and then went back into the past, they would have sort of had to deal with this added complication of these like fascist people displaced in time and having to worry about the ramifications of that. So I understand why they were disintegrated, but it was a little bit murderous and even more sort of weird in comparison to how they treated Elnor and didn't automatically kill him. But then we get a fast-paced sequence where the crew are trying to race to go back in time, and they have to plug in the Borg Queen. And I have to say, the Borg Queen throughout the rest of this episode is properly menacing, but the moment where Jurati plugs the Borg Queen in, and then she just sort of topples over on the floor and just face plants, just made me die laughing. I'm sorry, I just can't help imagining the Borg Queen just going whomp on the ground. And I was literally dying with laughter at that moment. However, it was saved a few moments later where Jurati was sort of lying on the ground and the Borg Queen sort of came crawling around the corner with their spine sticking out. I was like, ah! I am very scare-roused right now. Like, seriously, if I saw the Borg Queen crawling at me on the ground like that, I would be like, I have feelings. Many of them conflicting. But then she gets all properly menacing, where she, like, hooks herself up into the ship, and then she's, like, does the calculations, send them back in time. I was like, oh, and then you see the green light. It was just, it was so menacing and wonderful. I was like, oh, this is the Borg Queen that I wanted. The crew then goes back in time. We get a very trippy sequence with, like, sparks going backwards. I thought the visualization was great. And then after the main titles, we have the crew landing by Chateau Picard in the past. Now, I found it funny that no one whoever lives at Chateau Picard at this era, like, noticed the giant crash landing that happened, or like any government officials came asking questions about it, but we'll just let it go at this point. But then we get a sequence where the crew is trying to figure out what to do with the Borg Queen, while at the same time Elnor is slowly dying on the table. But that then leads to the fact that Elnor does die. He gets a sweet moment with Raffi and then passes away, which honestly had me kind of shocked, and I really liked, because it gave stakes to this moment. Not only does it make it feel like our characters could die at any moment, it also means, as we sort of hear later, considering this is a time travel story, that there is possibility to save Elnor by fixing time. And so it adds stakes not only in these big dramatic ways of like, we need to fix the time period, but we also might be able to save Elnor. So I liked it being given sort of like personal smaller stakes rather than the big grand ones, and it made it feel more real. So I really appreciated that. Especially it also gives us more economy of characters too. We don't have to like focus on Elnor and Rios, all these different characters. We can just focus on our main crew. So it allows the storyline to feel more focused, because we don't have Elnor in there as well. Because while I've liked Elnor as a character for the most part, he's always felt kind of sidelined, and he had a lot of potential, but he never really capitalized on it. So I as sad as I am to see Elnor go, I understand and don't miss him as much as maybe I would miss other characters like Rios, Raffi, or Seven. So all around, I think it was a smart choice. My only knock against this scene is that when Elnor dies, Raffi gets incredibly heartbroken by this moment. And I get it. Like, she definitely had a sort of mother feeling towards Elnor that we saw even back in the first episode of this season, considering that she was, like, having him come on her ship, that she was captaining, and all that sort of stuff. But it also felt a little bit overdramatic in the sense that we haven't seen that as much on camera, so it felt a little bit much, considering that it was also in comparison to Picard, who we knew for Picard, Elnor was his sort of adoptive son. Like, this was his, like, essentially his kid in a lot of different ways. And while I appreciate that Picard wouldn't be like an emotional wreck, he is a captain, he's been doing this for years, he did the right thing by being like, all right, we need to steel ourselves together, we need to pull ourselves up and get going, because we have other more important things to worry about, we can't grieve right now. I would have liked a smaller moment for Picard, and so it felt a little bit egregious to have like Raffi like just so distraught, which again, I do like that she calls him out and being like, you and Q have been playing these games forever. I thought that was a great scene, but it just, the difference in emotion, I felt a little bit I thought Raffi was a little bit bit too much and Picard was a little bit too not enough. And so I feel like there could have been a little bit of a balance in between there. But overall, I think this choice was fantastic. But then this leads to our crew deciding that they need to go and find the Watcher, and we get one quick scene before they teleport away where I loved between Rios and Seven, where Rios basically says, do I look like a fascist bastard? And Seven's like, fascist no, bastard yes. I thought that was sweet. But then we do get a moment where Seven looks in the mirror at her lack of Borg implants. And I'm really... I see that this is seeing the stuff down the line for maybe Seven having conflicted feelings about like having these lasting scars on her body of the trauma that she's faced that has so clearly affected her, even as we see back in season 1. And as we notice later in the episode, she's much calmer now that she doesn't have these like very clear trauma points on her body. And it makes me think of things like The Body Keeps the Score, a book that was written about how trauma sort of exists in our bodies and how our reactions to it. And so I really am hoping that the show doesn't go down the line of saying like Seven's better because she doesn't have these sort of like traumas inflicted upon her body and that she thinks she's a better person without the Borg implants. Because this season as a whole seems to be really kind of focusing on ideas of abuse. I mean, very clearly we're going to be talking about the abuse that Picard faced from his father, and that's sort of being reflected within the situation with Q, sort of also like Picard feeling guilt and not being able to save his mother from the abuse of his father. And ultimately I hope the season really points out the fact that it was not Picard's fault. And so I think that this stuff with Q and Picard is going towards that same idea, with Q sort of being like, you're feeling guilty about not being able to save your mother, but ultimately it's not your fault that someone else was an abuser towards you and your mother. And I think that also reflects something that Patrick Stewart dealt with in his own life, speaking about the fact that he has spoken about in many interviews about how his own father was abusive as well. So I really think that there's these interesting ideas about abuse that the seasons bring up. And I really hope that that doesn't come out with 7 of 9 being like, oh, I'm better without having gone through the trauma, because then would feed into these really unfortunate tropes that we see where people are better without their trauma, and I really dislike, or conversely, people saying that they're better because of their trauma. And so it's a very hard ground to walk with someone being like just accepting that something traumatic happened to them and it's neither made them better nor worse, it's just their experience in life. And so I really hope that the show is able to walk that line, and that's being hinted at here with 7. However, that's more of a season-long arc that I'm going to be keeping my eye on. But back to our characters, though, we do have them jumped over into LA, and Seven and Raffi have some really wonderful scenes. We get to see the sanctuary districts that Raffi arrives in, which are the districts that we saw in Deep Space Nine, where a bunch of homeless people were crowded into and were basically put into languish. And it's a very sort of interesting discussion about how we treat homeless people, the sort of class disparities that we're starting to see. And I really loved the shot where they had them right in a sanctuary district with all the homeless right next to this sort of like poster of where I'm assuming the Brent Spiner character will appear as soon as sort of one of these like higher upper class like rich people like Elon Musk figures, and sort of that dichotomy of like people being poor and also these aspirations to space, and sort of like the class disparity exemplified by people like Elon Musk, who I'm sure is going to be like a stand-in with soon later on in Brent Spiner. So I really love that this show is willing to address those very topical discussions about class and how we treat the homeless using something from Star Trek lore like the Sanctuary District. So I think that that's really cool to see, and I love that class disparity. One thing I will say, though, is that Raffi gets mugged by the guy, and then she starts taking his money, and I'm like, number one, wouldn't that cause ripple effects in time because you're taking some dude's money who would have had it otherwise? And number two, that dude was mucking people. Like, how did he have so much money? It was a little bit of a weird moment. But then I also really like the moment where they sneak into the tower to try and find this Watcher person, and they talk to the security guard, and they like pretend to be girlfriends, and you can see that there's like tension between the two of them because they do have feelings for each other, even though they aren't really together anymore, but they kind of are, and they do have feelings for each other, and so pretending this way was kind of nice. And I also like that the way they play is like, fuck that Kevin guy, fuck that Kevin security guard, you're the better security guard, let us go up to the top of the tower. I thought that was just a fun little sequence, and so I like these scenes between Seven and Raffi. But then we also get scenes with Rios that I feel were a little bit more contrived, just a hair. I mean, Rios teleports in and he falls on the ground and hits his head pretty dang hard, like, damn. And so it felt a little bit contrived to be able to get him to end up in this sort of like pro bono hospital, but I did really like all these sequences with this doctor that he had. I mean, the chemistry between these two is really nice. I thought Rios like played up like being a very sweet, and I really liked her bedside manner with like him telling his backstory about his family, and then her using that as an opportunity to like break his finger in place, and Rios being like, no, I gotta go save everybody, and then also looking for his badge with the kid, and like doing a really good job of interacting with the child. I thought it was very, very sweet to see his like moments with the child trying to get his badge back. And I think it's probably gonna lean into to, what I'm assuming will probably be a romance plot between Rios and whoever this doctor is, who's probably going to be our in for this modern day setting of Star Trek, that she's going to be our sort of character in this 2024 world that we're going to have to learn about, like the sanctuary districts and the way immigrants are treated. Because as we see at the end of the episode, ICE literally shows up and arrests Rios and the doctor because he doesn't have his immigration cards. And again, another very topical, prescient topic that is tying in, I'm assuming, to things like the sanctuary districts and undocumented workers, but feels more real. I mean, even though I love the Deep Space Nine episode about the sanctuary districts, it was a very, like, it feels like something that could very much really happen in our real world. It was a fictional setting for that. And here, I like that the show is, since it's being set closer to home, we do have ICE agents arresting people. And that is something that would happen. They're not shying away from what would happen to someone who would be seen as, an undocumented person and potentially an illegal immigrant with Rios. Again, stereotyping people that way. And so I think that this is I'm interested to see how this Star Trek handles it. It could handle it badly, but I think the show really addressing these very topical issues in a very direct way, I think is truly excellent. Also, I should mention within the storyline, obviously we have the butterfly effect of Rios' comm badge being out in the wild. And also I will mention too, there is a brief little Rick and Morty reference here, which is kind of fun considering that Mike McMahon, who runs Star Trek Lower Decks, was also one of the showrunners on Rick and Morty at one time. So a nice little cross-universe connection there. I thought that was kind of cool. However, all that does bring me to my favorite storyline of the episode, which is Picard, Jurati, and the Borg Queen. And oh boy, everything that this storyline was fantastic. Because basically, we're having Jurati break her little Borg egg. Like people having their trans egg broken, being like, oh, they're realizing that they're trans. I feel like Jurati is having her Borg egg broken. She's realizing oh, I'm kind of interested in what it means to be a Borg. And so I'm very excited. This whole storyline is fascinating. I really loved Picard sort of pushing back against Jurati and saying, I don't want you to assimilate it. That's a very bad idea. I loved his line where halfway to hell is still not a good destination. Wonderful line there. But I like that he eventually convinces her, and I liked the very terrifying sequence with Jurati hooking in and getting partially assimilated as she's trying to invade the Borg Queen's mind. Just the imagery of the Borg Queen going to different doors and opening them and going through emotions was truly a terrifying one. And I love the moments where she's like the laugh out loud moment. She's like, I see you as my dad, to Picard. And Picard's like, well, we're hitting the deep end now. But the heartbreaking moment was when the Borg Queen hits sadness, and we basically get a revelation that Jurati is suicidal at times. And I think the way that the hopelessness that she discussed in that felt very true. As someone who has been suicidal in my lifetime, it felt very real. The way that it was described here. And so I like that respectfulness and showcasing Jurati's emotional state, especially probably after the events of Star Trek Picard Season 1 and what she went through there. But that all leads to the absolutely wonderful moment where the Borg Queen and Jurati start saying, whose hand is this? And they go, mine, ours. And that, it was just truly oh, I loved it. It's showing to me that whoever is writing the Borg this season, it truly gets it. I love the little pieces of Borg lore that we've been getting. The Borg Queen is able to see across time, or this idea that the Borg Queen is kind of not necessarily this individual within the collective, but she's sort of representative of the collective. It's sort of an idea that we've all kind of had within Star Trek before, but we've never really addressed it. The Borg Queen just feel like this evil, mechanizing person, both especially in First Contact, but even more so on Star Trek Voyager. So I like that this show sort of showcasing the Borg Queen as more a manifestation of the collective in this way. I think it's a very abstract concept depicted in a really wonderful way here, and absolutely terrifying. All leading to two really good moments after this fact, because I really loved with the Borg Queen confronting Picard. Really great. And she's like, you humans, you try to hope in the face of hopelessness. Let's just skip all this stuff. I'm going to win here. Let's just skip all of it, and I can give you the coordinates, but you're not going to deactivate me. And I love Jurati just getting a moment where she says, are you sure about that? And then she has the coordinates in a folder marked shit I stole from the Borg Queen. Hilarious and wonderful, and just a great turnaround. Just the menace in this scene from the Borg Queen, and the way that Jurati turned it around made me absolutely fall in love with Jurati. But then the best moment, the cherry on top, was when the Borg Queen says, you have done something even more dangerous. And Jurati says, what? Impressed me. Shivers down my spine. I retract all my concerns about the Borg Queen from last episode. She was phenomenal here. I am so here for everything going on with the Borg Queen from here on out, and I am so curious to see what her storyline with Jurati is going to be, because like I said, I think Jurati's little Borg egg is being broken here, and I am so here for it. But that is my review of this episode of Star Trek Picard. I am very excited. These 3 episodes have been fantastic so far and have me very excited going forward. I really hope this season continues this quality trajectory because it has been fantastic. But all that being said, I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to go subscribe to my second channel, Jessiegender After Dark, so you don't miss next week's review of Star Trek Picard and all my reviews going forward. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss my video essays and things like that. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy, my friends.